All right. Welcome back to Cybersecurity Foundations for the Real World. We are now on Module 2, Foundational Security Concepts. So if you're watching this, that means you have stuck with me. I didn't bore you in the intro video. I didn't bore you or lose you in Module 1 when we started talking about IT systems and the foundations of everything. So I appreciate you sticking with me. So far, it's just been the tip of the iceberg. We have so much to cover, and I'm super excited. So let's jump into it. In this module number 2, we're going to be talking about arguably one of the most important concepts in the entire world of cybersecurity. We're going to be talking about the CIA Triad. We're going to be talking about something called controls or security controls. But before we jump into that, really quickly, what did we learn in Module 1? Right, let me take it back one slide, and let's look at the Module 1 key takeaways that we learned. Right, we talked about what information technology means, right? It encompasses the systems, the networks, the data, right? We talked about the difference between systems, the endpoints, the servers, the applications, the underlying infrastructure. Right? We talked about networking, how systems can communicate with each other, and that if we lost the ability for systems to communicate with each other, the entire world would cease to function, right? And then data, the focal point of why we're doing everything, why we have information technology in the first place, that these are the tools that are used to actually do something with that data. And we talked about the dependence that all organizations have on technology, right? Organizations depend on technology in order to function, in order to make money, in order to provide services for whatever they provide services for, right? To provide for the world. And the fact that we have these information systems, the fact that they exist, and the fact that organizations depend on them so much, not even just organizations, right? Us as the consumer, you and me. The fact that that exists is the whole reason why cybersecurity exists. We, as cybersecurity professionals, you and I, we exist to protect these information systems, the networks, the systems, the underlying infrastructure, protect the data from falling into the wrong hands. And then really quickly, we ended the module 1 with looking at real world scenarios like the Equifax hack. We looked at the Colonial Pipeline. We essentially looked at what happens when cybersecurity fails, right? And just a reminder, to no fault necessarily to the cybersecurity professionals that are working to protect these organizations. Sometimes you can have all the defense in depth. Sometimes you can have all the layers of defense in your organization, and these controls still fail, right? Attackers are still able to get through. So that is what we covered in Module 1. So let's talk about the foundations of cybersecurity. I harped on this in the Module 1. Cybersecurity begins with understanding what must be protected. Okay, we're not just jumping into theoreticals and all these different cool tools that cybersecurity professionals use. We first need to understand why we exist and what are you and I protecting. What do we use to protect them? The underlying principles. That's what we're going to talk about today. One of my main goals of this course is to change how you think, right? How you as a cybersecurity professional thinks about the world around you and how to protect the systems around you. So as a cybersecurity professional, you and I must always ask ourselves, what are we protecting? What risks are there, right? And we'll jump into risk later on in the course, but what are the possible ways that our items or our systems or our organization, what are the ways that they can be attacked? And then how do we protect, how do we reduce the chance that that happens? How do we reduce the impact that if we do get attacked, if we do successfully get attacked, how do we minimize the damage, right? These are the questions we need to constantly be asking ourselves. We don't want to just be deploying different solutions all willy-nilly for no reason, right? We have to do things with a purpose. And what we talk about in today's module will really harp on purpose, okay? The reason why the CIA Triad is at the core of all cybersecurity, you are going to learn that, and then you are going to say, okay, now I know what Cyberdarsh meant by doing everything in cybersecurity with purpose. So let's jump into module number 2, foundational security concepts. So what's on our agenda today? We're going to be talking about the assets, right? The first question, what are we protecting, is our assets. All right. And then we're going to be talking about the CIA Triad, which is the very core of cybersecurity. Okay. And then we're going to break down what the CIA Triad actually means. And then we're going to end the course with the security controls. What are the actual mechanisms that we use to reduce risk? Okay. What are the actual things we're able to implement in terms of cybersecurity? Okay. And then I'm also going to show you some really cool stuff with things in my home lab. So if you've seen what I'm doing on social media, you might be familiar with my home lab, but I want to use the home lab throughout this course so that we're not just talking theoretical, that I'm actually able to show you small examples of what this actually means. What are we actually talking about? All right. So what is an asset? Okay, we use this word asset all the time in cybersecurity. We use this term asset in IT all the time. An asset, it's simply anything that is of importance to you and your organization. Okay, if it has value to you, to your organization, it is an asset. All right, and we can break up assets in 3 different classes. We have our digital assets, we have our physical assets, and then we have our intangible assets. Okay, and you might be saying, well, intangible could be the same thing as digital. Let's break this down. When we talk about digital assets, we're talking about the data, all the information that we have on our systems, on our customers, right? If we're a hospital, then some of our digital assets will be the data, right? The actual health information that we have on our patients. Probably of the utmost importance is the data and the patients themselves. Digital assets would be all the different types of software that we might be utilizing in our organization. Okay, if you're working at the hospital, then the actual software that you use to conduct business on a day-to-day basis are a part of your digital asset stack. Okay, without the software, we'd be running into problems, right? We wouldn't be able to do our job. If the software failed, if we lost access to the software, or the software got hacked, or the software became unavailable, then we would have a lot of problems, right? So by sitting there and saying, what are we protecting? You need to think about your digital assets. We are protecting our data. What kind of data? Health data, okay, if we're working at a hospital. What software do we have deployed in the environment? What software are we depending on to do our jobs? That's the stuff that we need to protect as well. Protecting digital assets is vital for business continuity and cybersecurity, okay? And then aside from your digital assets, you continue asking yourself, what are we protecting? Our physical assets. This is the actual tangible, right? All the laptops in the organization, all the computers that the doctors are using, right? The servers, the file servers that everyone uses to send each other files, right? The email servers, the servers that are hosting your critical applications, their database servers, right? The actual infrastructure, the hardware that this stuff lives on, the mobile devices, right? The pagers, whatever it is. If you're working at a hospital and you need to contact a doctor for an emergency, you want to make sure that you have access to their mobile devices, right? Their pagers, whatever it is, whatever method you use to contact doctors in a split second in cases of emergency. If those are physical assets, we need to protect those as well. The management and security are vital for operational efficiency and safety. When we talk about physical assets, don't just think about the IT systems either. All right. In cybersecurity, we need to think outside the box. When we say physical assets, we're not just talking about computers. We're talking about the systems that manage the doors, right? If you lose power and all the doors automatically shut, that could cause life-threatening issues as well, right? So you want to make sure that we're protecting even the building itself. When it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to protecting assets, you need to think outside of the box and don't just hone in on the computer that's sitting in front of you, the mobile phone you have in your hand. All right, you need to think about everything that enables the business, everything that enables your organization to operate. And think to yourself, if something happened to this asset, what is the outcome? What is the impact? Okay, and once you sit there and think like that, then you can start determining what security mechanisms you can deploy and use to protect those assets. Okay, this is why we're sitting here and thinking about this stuff. And then, like I said, think outside the box. We talked about our digital assets and our physical assets, but it doesn't stop there. We have to think about the intangible as well. All right, if your company is developing the next breakthrough technology in medicine or whatever it is, you have intellectual property that needs to be protected, patented, whatever it is. You want to make sure that the bad guys don't get their hands on this stuff either. Whether they're going to steal it or blackmail you or sell it on the dark web, whatever it is, you want to protect your intellectual property. Your reputation of your company, it all boils down to trust in your consumer, right? Trust of your consumers. If you are a business and you have a service that you're offering to the world, or you're selling some kind of product, if people don't trust your business, you lose business. You take a financial hit. So we need to be protecting the reputation of the company. So in cybersecurity, if someone is trying to visit your company's website and the website's been defaced and it has some crazy messaging on it, people are going to say, oh, dang, this organization got hacked. I can't really trust them anymore. I don't really want to check out and buy any products on their website because obviously they've been hacked. So who knows if I go to check out a product, if my information is safe? Are they going to steal my credit card data? Okay, that is a huge reputational loss that translates to financial loss. The protection of intangible assets is just as paramount, especially for long-term success. You and I are sitting here thinking, what do we do in terms of being a cybersecurity professional? What are we actually protecting? It all falls into these three classes. Okay, you sit there and you say, what are my digital assets? What are my physical assets? And what are my intangible assets? And then how do I protect those? Before implementing security controls, why is it important to first identify what assets exist? You need to identify why assets exist, because if you are sitting there as a cybersecurity professional and you say, there's this really cool technology that does an awesome job protecting manufacturing equipment. I think we really need that. But you work at a doctor's office. You're not manufacturing anything. How does that make any sense? Are you going to go out and spend $500,000 on the latest manufacturing security tool to protect robots when they manufacture equipment? No, that doesn't make any sense. You want to think about the security mechanisms that you're going to employ that are relative and related to your organization, to your industry, to the business that you're in. Okay, you need to be applying security protections that make sense for your business. Every organization differs in what kind of protections they need. So you need to first identify what assets you have. What kind of data do you have? What kind of digital assets do you have in your organization? Are you dealing with health information? Well, then you have to worry about HIPAA. When it comes to government compliance, you have to worry about the laws and regulations out there. If you're dealing with financial records, there's different laws for financial data. Protecting financial data is a lot different than protecting your mother's homemade cookie recipe. Sure, can that be your trade secret? Yeah, but if someone steals your cookie recipe, that could be detrimental to you and your business. But if you are dealing with financial records of people, right, credit card information, social security numbers, whatever it is, and someone breaks into that and steals that information, not only are you going to suffer reputational loss, you're going to face laws and regulations too. You're going to face substantial fines that could also eventually end in imprisonment. Okay, this stuff is serious. That's why we need to sit here and ask ourselves, what are our assets? And then you go from there. So examples of organizational assets, we kind of already touched on this, right? The data, the actual customer records, the financial information, your secrets. That's part of your data. Okay, data is an asset. The systems, the laptops that you have floating around, the mobile devices that all your employees use, the applications, the software, these are assets that you need to protect. The servers that are providing some kind of critical service to your organization, enabling stuff to work. All right. The infrastructure, your firewalls, your switches, your networking devices. Those are assets too. If somebody compromised that, your systems are no longer able to communicate with each other. All the systems in the hospital go down and they can't talk to each other. You're on one floor, there's a patient on another floor. You can't get the health information from that patient quick enough. And then, problems happen. We need to make sure that systems can communicate with each other. These are assets, right? Storage systems. You're storing health information, right, of all your 100,000 patients in the hospital. And then don't forget, we talked about intangible. People and processes are also assets. We need to think outside the box and not just think about the data and your physical assets. The actual employees are assets. The administrators, the people working there. Even your processes and procedures are assets, okay? That document showing what to do when a system gets hacked, that is an asset. Those documents are assets. Those procedures, what to do in the event of a natural disaster. Those are procedures that need to be protected as well and maintained. These are all things of value. That's what defines it as an asset, something that's important to you, that serves some kind of purpose for you, and that it's of value and you need to protect it. Which type of asset do attackers typically target most often, and why? I love throwing these trick questions at you because, it's all over the place. It depends on the type of attacker. All right, and we're going to jump into that in the later modules. But one could argue nowadays that the people asset are the ones most targeted today, because attackers are realizing that at the end of the day, the people working at the organization are always the weakest links in the chain. Okay, you can have the craziest technical stack, protection stack, all the latest and greatest security solutions employed. And if you're an attacker, are you going to figure out how to break through that? Or are you just going to trick one of the employees into giving you access to the network and then you can steal everything? Or are you going to trick them into sending you all the proprietary and secret data? But again, it depends on the type of attacker, right? They could equally just as often go after your actual systems, go after your actual networks. They go after everything. It's not just one. You don't have one attacker that just goes after one thing. That's all, right? There's always an end goal, and there's always multiple steps to get to your end goal. So a little bit of a trick question there. So the meat and potatoes of what we are here to talk about, the CIA Triad. I need you to understand and drill this into your head. Everything boils down to the CIA Triad. Everything that you and I do in our career of cybersecurity ultimately always boils down to the CIA Triad. If you take nothing out of this course except one thing, please take the CIA Triad out of the course. Okay, this is what you absolutely have to walk away with. Everything we do in our job relates to the CIA Triad. Every single action we take on a daily basis comes back to the CIA Triad. This is the foundation of every cybersecurity decision. You and I, our job, if I came to you and I said, hey, we have X, Y, and Z company, we need to protect them. They have these assets, we need to protect these assets. What do? You're going to sit there and you're going to think about the types of assets they have, right? And then you're going to say to yourself, my goal is to protect the confidentiality of these assets. My goal is to protect the integrity of these assets. And my goal is to protect the availability of these assets. Once you realize that these three are your goals, you go from there and you start branching out and devising a strategy on how to protect those assets. If one of these principles fails, what impact could that have on an organization? And we're going to talk about that, or we're going to dive into it. Availability is one of those things in the CIA Triad. This is one of the principles that really dictates that you must do things with a purpose. There's an old saying that the most secure system in the world is a system that's powered off, disconnected, locked into a box, and thrown into the bottom of the ocean. That is the most secure system in the world. If you have that system and you did all of that, you threw it at the bottom of the ocean, what purpose does it serve? Nothing, right? It's useless. No one can use it. As cybersecurity professionals, you and I cannot go to those lengths so that we make systems useless to people that need them. So let's break down the CIA Triad. Confidentiality, the C in CIA. What is confidentiality? It is protecting your information, protecting your assets from unauthorized access. And what we mean by this is that if you work at an organization, the only people that should be accessing your systems or looking at your data, the only people that should be doing that are the ones that you have explicitly authorized to do so, whether it's the employees or your customers who need access to certain data, right? Depending on the product or service that you're offering, only they should be able to view and do anything with your data. If you work at a hospital and I have nothing to do with that hospital, I don't work for the hospital, I don't work for you, I'm not a consultant, I'm just a random guy on the street, should I be able to look at and see all of the health information of all 100,000 patients of the hospital? No, absolutely not. Should I be able to walk into the hospital and log in and start doing things on the hospital laptop? If I walk up to the receptionist desk, should I be able to log into that computer? No, absolutely not. That's asinine, and that's confidentiality. You want to make sure that we are protecting all of our assets from unauthorized access. We are ensuring that only authorized individuals or systems can view protected data. What we're going to learn in this course is that you have to even break down confidentiality more than just protecting it from outsiders. Okay, we're going to get into that. Confidentiality also means that within your organization, not everybody should have the same type of access to the information. If you and I are working at a finance institution, we're working at the finance institution, I work in HR, or I work in payroll, whatever department does payroll, and you work in IT. Should you in IT have access to modify payroll data? Should you be able to go into payroll and change how much money is paid out to the employees and or the contractors? No, absolutely not. You in IT, should you have access to see how much people are getting paid? No, absolutely not. So that is confidentiality also. You have to protect the data, not just from people on the outside, but from people within the organization as well who should not have that type of access. Not everybody needs that type of access. And then we're going to talk about throughout this course how to ensure confidentiality. How do you actually implement confidentiality? There's things such as encryption, right? Turning data into ciphertext, making it unreadable unless you have the necessary keys to translate it back into readable text, right? Authentication mechanisms, right? We're going to go over that. General access control. How are you controlling who has access to what? So that's confidentiality. That's the first C. And let's talk about integrity. Is the data accurate? Can you trust it? As you and I are a cybersecurity professional, we have to make sure that systems and data are not altered in some kind of malicious way, that people who are unauthorized cannot alter the data, and they have not altered the data. You work at the hospital. You're a doctor. Your job is to administer medication at the hospital to your patients. And you pull up your iPad and you look at patient X, Y, and Z and you say, she needs this type of medicine at this milligrams, this amount of medicine needs to be administered to her. Because you're looking at her chart, right? You're looking at all the information on the iPad and you say, okay, based on this information, she needs this much of this medicine. You, as a doctor, you have an expectation to trust this information that you're looking at on the iPad. What happens, all right, think about it. What happens if an attacker somehow got access into these records, into these health records, and changed it up? It's scary to think, but we as cybersecurity professionals, you and I, we have to think about this stuff. If somebody maliciously gained access to these health records and changed it, and instead of I don't know, 50 cc or whatever it is, instead of this cc type of medicine being administered to the patient, the chart says 200. You could potentially kill her. You could kill people. This is a serious threat to life. That's what we mean by the integrity of the data. How do we ensure that no attacker or nobody on the inside, because it can even be accidental, how do we make sure that the data that we're using to base our decisions on is accurate? How do we make sure that we can trust that data, that it has not been altered without approval, that without authorization? That is the integrity. Because when we look at data, we use data to make decisions. And so if the data is compromised, our decisions are compromised. And so we do have protections and ways to make sure that data has not been altered in some kind of malicious fashion. Okay, we have something called hashing. We have digital signatures, and we can monitor the integrity of files as well. As a cybersecurity professional, you are thinking about the confidentiality of your assets, making sure that only authorized individuals have access to your assets. You're thinking about, how do I make sure that the data and the assets aren't tampered with, that the data hasn't been changed maliciously, or someone hasn't walked up to my systems and changed all the configurations, right? If you are a water plant and you are in charge of sanitizing water, how do you make sure that the integrity of your systems are stable, that they're maintained, that no one has hacked into your systems and changed the configurations, thus not sanitizing the water properly and now putting everybody at risk in your region? And then availability. Okay, this goes back to that age-old saying of throwing the box into the bottom of the ocean. All right, if you are a doctor, and I love going back to the hospital, because it's such a perfect way to make analogies on this and comparisons. But if you're the doctor at the hospital, doctors need access to the health information to make their decisions on how to treat patients. You have 50,000 patients running around. You need your information in order to actually serve your patients and take care of your patients. Well, what happens if all the systems go down? What happens if all the medical devices go down and you can no longer use them? You can no longer see the patient's data to see what kind of medicine they need, right? What if all the lights in the building shut off and you can no longer see anything? If everything in the surgical room stopped functioning? Whatever systems you use, the anesthesiology, the anesthesia that you use to put the patient under, those systems go down, right? This is real threat to human life. You have to make sure that systems are available. If you are at a manufacturing plant and it's your job your company manufactures cars, the robotics in your manufacturing plant need access to data in order to actually manufacture these cars and put these cars together. You have to pump out 100,000 cars every month, every quarter. But if all your systems go down, now you're falling behind on your production schedule and you start losing money, right? If everything in your plant goes down for an extended period of time, now you've just experienced so much financial loss now that you need to start laying people off. Okay, organizations depend on the technology, right? We talked about this in Module 1. Organizations depend on the IT systems to function. So as a cybersecurity professional, you and I must ensure that these systems don't get taken down, whether on accident or maliciously. Because if these systems go down, we see real impact. We see disruptions to business operations, and we have ways to protect this as well. And we're going to talk about this in the course, right? Redundancy, making sure that you don't just have one of a certain type of system, that if one system goes down, you have something to take on the duty of the machine that went down, of the system that went down. Backing up, right? Have backups of your data. I'm sure you hear that all the time. Make sure you have a backup of your data. Which industries might experience the most severe consequences if systems become unavailable? Businesses in the health industry, the hospitals, critical infrastructure, power plants, the company that manages the power that gets the electricity to your house. If they experience downtime, we all lose electricity, right? Water, running water, airline industry, the air travel industry, people get stuck. What happens if air traffic control, their systems go down? Now you have airplanes flying blind in the sky. So this is also why availability is absolutely critical. It's not just about all these fancy tools to make sure that your data is protected and you're monitoring. You have all these dashboards up, right? We need to make sure that we're actually preventing our data, our systems, our assets from going down. This is why we need to critically think. Okay, it's strategy is equally as important. And when we start talking about availability, strategy is heavy on that. Architecture becomes heavy when we talk about availability. And then I want to talk about a concept called security controls. We've talked about confidentiality, integrity, availability. We talked about information systems, the endpoints, the servers, our applications, our storage, the virtualization of servers. What are we actually putting in place to protect these? That's called our security controls. All right. This is a term that's used left and right every single day in the cybersecurity industry. What are your controls? If you worked at a business and I was auditing you and I came and I said, hey, what controls do you have in place to protect your data? Tell me about your controls. Show me evidence of your controls. These are the actual safeguards. This is the actual procedures and the actual software and the actual technologies and the actual strategies that you've put in place to protect your assets. So when we talk about security controls, right, what mechanisms do you have in place? Security controls can be broken up into three main categories. Now, early on, I told you I also teach Security Plus. Security Plus goes, they break it down into a lot of different categories. I don't think we need that right now. For the exam, it's good, but for real world practicality, think about it from the perspective of these three. First category being technical controls. When we say technical controls, we are talking about things like the firewalls. All right, you have these, whether it's a virtual firewall or a physical hardware firewall that's controlling what systems can talk to what systems. The firewall stops the bad systems from trying to communicate into your network, communicate with your systems. The firewall stop people from outside of your organization trying to communicate with your systems, right? That's a technical control. Encryption, right? We'll go over, we have a whole section dedicated to encryption, to cryptography, but that's another technical control. That's protecting your data, making it unreadable unless you have the keys to turn it back from ciphertext into legible text. All right, you've heard of anti-malware. That's a technical control. You want to make sure at your organization that all your systems, all your endpoints, right? Everything we talk about is all connected. All your endpoints, the systems that the daily users are using on a daily basis, you want to make sure that all those systems have anti-malware. That is a technical control. Monitoring software that you're using to see what's happening in your organization. Those are technical controls. You want to implement the software to be able to see what's happening. That's a technical control. But we're not just talking about software. All right. I want you to understand this. We're not just talking about software. It's the same thing when we talked about digital assets, physical assets, and your intangible. Administrative controls is as equally important as your technical controls. What do we mean by administrative controls? What policies does your organization have in place? The policy that says you're not allowed to share your password with your coworkers. The policy that says, hey, if an outside vendor is visiting your building, you have to escort them. You want to make sure that the vendor is not trying to do anything malicious or steal something or wander off, right? That's a policy. It's also a procedure. The procedure that says, hey, every day when you clock into work, this is a checklist of the things that you as a security professional need to protect. You need to check this list and make sure that nothing bad is happening on the network. The procedure of the front desk guard of your organization, the procedure that says, hey, every time somebody comes, you must check them in, you must check their ID, you must make them log what time and who they are, right? What time they've come in. That's a procedure. The policy might say, hey, you're not allowed to use your phone on premise. You can't take pictures of anything. You can't even use your phone in situations, right? And then we talk about governance. It's everything. How are you protecting your data, right? Governance goes all the way from who's in charge on the hierarchy, right? Your chief information security officer. You have this entire hierarchy of security professionals. Who's determining the strategy? What kind of data? How are you protecting that data? Do you have it documented? Okay, that is equally as important as your technical controls. People need to know what to do, right? We need guidance, we need direction, we need policies. All right, you don't want your company being the Wild West, where as soon as someone gets onboarded, you have nothing telling them like, hey, you're not allowed to do this, but you are allowed to do that. And they start transferring data from their work computer to a personal device. Policy must state that you're not allowed to do that. And then we have physical controls. Now, physical controls, yes, it's this awesome picture that I have on here. The camera, right? Cameras are a part of your physical controls. They allow you to surveil. They allow you to see what's happening physically, record what's happening so that if something does happen, you can go back and check the tapes. The locks on your doors, you want to make sure that you have strong locks, right? If you working in a sensitive area, a building that has sensitive systems inside, you want to make sure that you have locks. A security system. Okay, security system could be part of your physical control. It can bleed into the other areas too, but you want to make sure that maybe you need bulletproof windows. Physical control can also mean that you have security guards. Just the fact that you need security guards is a strategy in the physical controls category. Maybe you have things called bollards, which stop cars from ramming into buildings. That could be a part of your strategy too. Right? That is a physical control. The question on this slide is, why is technology alone not enough to fully secure an organization? Okay, you can have all the craziest technical controls, the encryption, the firewall stopping bad actors from breaking into your network and stealing your data. You can have the firewalls. You can have the anti-malware that stops viruses from hitting your systems. Cool. Oh, I was just able to walk into your building and steal all of your physical hardware. Cool. Now I have all your hard drives. Now I have all your data. I'm just going to sell everything. I'll sell it to the next person that's able to crack any encryption that you have on the physical hardware. Because they have it. They have it in front of them. Right? It could be a virtual server. It could be what's called a hypervisor, which we will talk about, that has 50 virtual machines on it. And now they have access to all that data. If I was able to just walk into your building and steal all your information, steal all the papers, steal all the computers, it doesn't matter what kind of technical controls you had. All right, I just bypassed it all. That's why we say that you need more than just technical controls. That's why technology alone is not enough. Okay, it has to be done in layers. So we're at the end of module 2 in terms of slides, but I do have other things to show you before we call it. But what did we take away from this module? We talked about our assets, right? Anything of value, whether it's the people, whether it's the processes, the physical stuff, right? The servers, the computers, the storage devices, the intangible, all right? Your reputation, your trade secrets, for your proprietary information, okay? The software that you're using, the data that you have, those are all assets. And then everything boils down to the CIA Triad: confidentiality, making sure that your data, your assets are only able to be viewed or processed or done anything with by people who are authorized to do so. The integrity, making sure that your data is trustworthy, that it hasn't been tampered with, that it hasn't been changed in some kind of malicious way, it hasn't been changed. And then availability, making sure that the systems are up when they need to be used, making sure that the data is available when it's needed. Availability. And then we just talked about the controls, right? Your technical controls, your physical controls, your administrative controls. The question on this slide: when evaluating security in an organization, which should be identified first? The controls in place or the assets being protected? Okay, let's say you are an auditor. Let's say your job is to come into my business and see what kind of security controls I have. What is the state of my company's cybersecurity? What's the first thing you're going to do? You're not going to just come in here and say, show me all your firewalls, show me all your monitoring tools. No, you are going to ask me, what kind of data are you dealing with? Who are your customers? What does your business do? How many computers do you have? What kind of computers do you have? Do you guys use mobile phones? Show me your processes. And then once you as the auditor have identified those assets. Now you can say, all right, I see that you are dealing with health information. Now let's talk about how you are protecting that health information. Because now that you know that there's health information in my business that you are auditing, if I told you, yeah, the only protection I have is the security guard up front. That's all we need. He or she will make sure that no one is able to get in and look at people's health information, right? You'd instantly fail me if that was a test. Put me out of business because you assessed what kind of assets I had and you determined that there was health information. And now that you know the health information, you know the severity, the seriousness of what we're protecting. We talked about confidentiality, integrity, and availability. I want to pull up, if you've seen this on social media, you know that I've been doing home labs, and I have what's called Proxmox, okay? And the reason I'm bringing this up is because we talked about the concepts, right? The strategy, the theoretical. I want to show you an example of what that actually means in practice. This is I actually have this computer in my house running this software called Proxmox. Okay, this Proxmox, and you should definitely dive into it, like I said, allows me to create virtual computers within my physical computer. So I can have multiple computers running inside of my physical computer. If I was a business, this Proxmox server, let's say this Proxmox server has critical virtual computers that are serving my hospital. I have what's called a domain controller that helps me manage all the other computers in the hospital. All right, I might have a file server that all the doctors can use to transfer health information back and forth to each other on different computers. All right, I might have a server that's in charge of scanning for vulnerabilities in the company, the hospital assets, right? Whatever it is, this is an asset. As a cybersecurity professional, it is my job to protect this. If this was a physical hardware, if this is what we call the hypervisor, right? This is what's called a hypervisor. If this was serving the hospital, this is an asset that needs to be protected. So let's break it down. Let's start with confidentiality. This hypervisor, this Proxmox, if I had a bunch of virtual machines here, would I want somebody just walking up to this and logging in and just deleting all these virtual machines? No, that could cause an outage. That could cause a lot of huge problems in the hospital. Do I want somebody just being able to log into this hypervisor and start controlling all my virtual machines? No, that would be terrible. Okay, so when we talk about confidentiality, I need to make sure that only authorized individuals can log into this interface and do stuff within this hypervisor. Probably the IT team. Maybe the IT team, the system administrators, are the only ones who should be able to log into this. The doctors should not be able to log into this and start messing around with the actual technology that allows the hospital to run, right? They need to do their jobs. They do not need to be logging into the hypervisor. Within Proxmox, we can control those permissions, okay? Access control. Okay, these are all different items I have in my hypervisor, right? A few virtual machines and a few storage disks that are holding the actual information. I don't want to overwhelm you, but there's a section here called permissions, users. If you were a part of the IT staff, you would have an account on this hypervisor. It would say your name. Right now, this is Cyberdarsh. Cyberdarsh is an account on this hypervisor, on this Proxmox server, that is allowed to log in. I put this account in a group called Home Lab Admins. If I go down to this section, Groups, then here is the group that I created, Home Lab Admins. What are the Home Lab Admins actually allowed to do? We can give them roles. Okay, we can give our users different roles. We can give our groups different roles. Okay, and this role section has a breakdown of what each role can do. Administrator, auditor, data store user, just a regular VM user. Proxmox also has documentation on what these roles can do. Administrator, anybody who has the administrator role has full privileges. Okay, they can do everything in Proxmox. Delete virtual machines, change configurations, change permissions. If I go here to permissions, the Home Lab admins group has the administrator role. The Cyberdarsh account is in Home Lab admins. That means that if I logged into the Cyberdarsh account, I would have access to do anything I wanted in this hypervisor, this Proxmox. Confidentiality means if that's my job, if I was required to have full admin rights to this server, to this Proxmox, then that's what the access that I have. But should a doctor have an account on here with full admin? No, absolutely not. That's confidentiality. The fact that I have permissions here, that the only way to log in is with a username and password, that is confidentiality. You'd have to know my password in order to get in here, right? If you tried to log into my Proxmox with a random username, let's say you were an attacker, that you somehow got to this area and you said, oh, if I can log into this, I can take down the entire hospital. You can just, you're not able to just type in Bob and then just random password. You try to log in and it's going to say authentication failure. Okay, this is confidentiality. Only authorized users are able to log into this. Okay, I could type in Cyberdarsh and then the password. I forgot my password, but I could type in the password and then log in and then do whatever I needed. That is confidentiality. Now, integrity. What does integrity mean when we talk about this? Integrity would mean if I was the administrator and I came in here and I was configuring Proxmox, I was configuring some really critical services that the hospital relied on to function, that nothing in here was maliciously changed or messed up, that no attacker got access to this and started deleting virtual machines or changing configurations, okay, that could really mess up the environment. That's integrity. Can I trust the efficiency of these systems, this entire application? Availability would mean, is this still functioning? Is the physical server turned on? Are these virtual machines still here? Availability, an attack on availability could be an attacker somehow logging into this and deleting all the virtual machines. And now we just lost critical services in the hospital and now people are in danger. Okay, maybe we had a virtual machine that was controlling the HVAC systems in the entire hospital and someone was able to get in here, log into that VM and start messing up the HVAC system. Okay, that would be a compromise in the integrity of that system, of the HVAC system. That'd be a compromise of confidentiality. Maybe they take down the HVAC system. That's a compromise of availability. Okay, so this is just one example. It's a powerful example because hypervisors run our world. All right, major organizations and corporations have hundreds and thousands of hypervisors managing hundreds and thousands of virtual computers. Hypervisors are one of the most protected assets in an organization. So that is just a quick example of CIA in practice. Let's jump back to our module, our presentation. And so that is the end of module 2. So we talked about assets, CIA Triad, and security controls. So you made it to the end of module 2. Again, the most important thing to take from this, if you don't take anything else, is the CIA Triad. I talked about Proxmox. Make sure you deep dive into Proxmox. Make sure you deep dive into hypervisors, virtualization. In the intro video that you watched, you and I agreed that every single thing I talk about in this course is of importance. You agreed by taking this course and continuing with it. You agreed that you would lock in and hone in on every single thing I talked about. So I need you to do your due diligence because the destiny of your journey is in your hands. You need to go research. You need to study. The grind doesn't stop. The studying doesn't stop. I'll see you in module 3.